Okay, in our last few minutes, before we reconvene with our fellows in the other room, the charge to each of us in these rooms was to ask you to engage the ideas, the researchers, the projects, and so on, and then to report back your observations and perhaps help us nudge our thinking into a different frame, to a different scale, to take a different tack, to maybe come to a bigger question that's nagging behind these that we have not quite yet kind of wrapped our minds around. So the idea is that we are going to, well, we had a recorder. I don't know if she's going to continue to record. Okay, we're going to record observations and reactions, and I'm actually pretty comfortable with critical ones as well, so you don't have to just cheerlead. And do we have mics for audience members? And they're going to be okay, right? Oh, you were just trying to get that hand to me. Somebody did also. Okay, Desdemona.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Oh, okay. I am so impressed with the design of the table and the quilts that come to life and the way the books sort of fall and are fun and playful. How did you guys come up with that?
Okay. I'm not actually sure. I do want to take that question, but I actually don't want to take our whole collective time right now. Do you mind if I ask to put you in touch with her for discussion? Because I think what we'd like to do is try to get observations and reactions to these, and maybe not so much more details about the individual pieces, because all of us will be available throughout lunch and the rest of the time. So maybe less kind of question and answer right now, more observations. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
A scholar at the University of Maryland, College Park, named Jason Farman, has written a book called Mobile Interface Theory, and it was just released, I think, December 14th of last year. One of the concepts that he talks about is emplacement, which is the recursive loop between mobile virtual engagement and social engagement in place. I think that the notion of emplacement is something that we could theorize more here in the context of all three projects. So in a way, I'd like to maybe hear some commentary about the ethical implications of emplacement. And I think that when we think about VOSMOB, what we think about is access to everyone. You don't need to have a smartphone, you just need to have an SMS-enabled phone. Who in the room has been thinking about the ethics of emplacement?
Okay, so that's a very good topic for us to think about. Did you have, yeah, Ben, did you have a comment? Yes. No, we're not censoring.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Barber, and this was a very impressive result of just a year or more's work, and wonderful. I do agree, though, that I think one needs to think rather more deeply than some of the projects have about entailments, implications, ethical and social and political consequences of the work. GPS technology has made a mockery of anything like human privacy. The fact we can locate anyone with a phone anywhere they are might be great if there's an earthquake and we're trying to find someone buried in a car, but imagine that technology in the hands of President Assad, for example, looking for opposition people. Imagine in the hands of a Homeland Security Department that has already said it's willing to do surveillance on American citizens as if they were foreign terrorists. and what the consequences of that might be. I was thinking about the reportage on the crisis connection, and it's a wonderful thing for serious health and civic emergencies, where everybody is in effect in a position to be the eyes and ears of who exactly are they the eyes and ears of? For example, you can report on a leaking gas tank. You can report then maybe on suspicious activity, or how about on a suspicious person who looks suspicious to you, and then think of that combined with the new gun laws that allow people to carry, and what happened in Florida, and I see a suspicious person and 3 other armed people show up in the community to take on that person. There are all kinds of entailments and implications of how this technology could be used if it was abused. And I think the assumption sometimes examining the technology in and of itself is to overlook the implications of a more repressive surveillance state. Some people would argue that we're living in a surveillance state, that the thousands of cameras being put up to track traffic and other things, the face recognition technologies, are in a position to do very serious damage to our privacy, to our freedom, and to political protest. So I think those sets of implications are important. In the latter couple of projects you talked about, you were aiming at kinds of civic and social interaction that are very positive, and that's great. But to think about, as I say, the other side of what can be done with these technologies seems to me something that the responsibility of this lab ought to take extremely seriously. And I think there are a whole set of questions that we don't have to go into here that really should be investigated. And I wonder whether the lab's thought about having an ethicist or a political philosopher or an ethical philosopher on the staff working with the engineers and design people developing these technologies to help them raise questions, the tough critical questions you don't necessarily think of. Because my experience of design people, particularly younger design people, is that they have brilliant and wonderful, innovative technological ideas. They often think in their own healthy, slightly naive terms about the positive uses without thinking of what some of the other entailments of them might be. So it just seems to me in general that would be a kind of caveat and warning not to stop doing in any way what you're doing, but to also be thinking systematically about how people with less benevolent motives in a more repressive state or city, or a more racist state and city, or a Homeland Security Department that thinks Americans, maybe terrorists, are likely to be able to utilize these technologies. Thank you.
That will be a very good thematic for us to bring forward to the afternoon session.
And let me repeat some of the comments you and I had. So, more and more we look at cities as these complex systems of systems, and they all interact with each other. But a good question to ask is, what are you trying to achieve? If you're designing these very complex things, what is the objective? And as we talked before, it has to be something like quality of life. I mean, of course, we want the trains to run on time, and we want less congestion, and we want all that. But there is a question of quality of life, and likely New York, Rio, Mumbai might have different optimizations. So it'd be interesting to think how different cities, what kinds of things would they optimize? Maybe it's very related to what kind of people would they like to attract, but also very important is not just to hear them talk, but to see how they behave. Because some cities may say, oh, I want the most talented young people imaginable, and you say, okay, so you'll have places open 24 hours a day. Say, are you kidding? I don't want that. Say, well, then you may have a problem. So you have to make some trade-offs, and that would be a fascinating way of studying cities.
So, and the question about what are we trying to
My name's Lynn Woodman. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, where I work in crisis communications. It seems to me that one of the issues is the most vulnerable communities in a non-crisis, those neighborhoods or communities that are less educated, less affluent, and more vulnerable, where people in those communities frequently expend a great deal of energy concealing their vulnerability. Working off the comment that, in the opening comments, that culture eats strategy for lunch every day, how are we going to build a sense of trust in people to expose vulnerability, having no idea whether they will receive assistance or exploitation? How will we equip people, vulnerable or otherwise, with appropriate technology? Can they use it? Will the display be large enough for them to read, and in what language? Because if English is not their primary language, how shall they reach out, and who shall respond in a language that can provide them safety? Thank you.
So the understanding that the understanding that a city is a patchwork of communities, and they all have different relationships to safety, security, a sense of being wanted to be known, to be seen, to be on display, to be mappable. And then the other question about, the cities that we take as our kind of our model. LA is itself a kind of multilingual, multi-ethnic, very international city. And the relationship of kind of this as a global place that is incredibly kind of globalized in terms of its number of ethnic and national kind of communities that are rooted here. That is an issue actually we've been thinking about, is the relation of the local and the global, and how the global manifests in the contexts of LA, such that you can't really make pronouncements about, and you certainly can't do technology solutions across situations. Yes.
So I actually
Cyrus.
have a Cyrus race.
Yes.
I have a comment regarding the privacy issue that was brought up. That's actually very important, and I just want to tell you from an engineering side, National Science Foundation has a couple of programs focusing on privacy. One of them is used to be called Cyber Trust, and it's now called Trustworthy Computing. And we actually have a grant from that program that looks exactly at the issue of location privacy. And the approaches we are taking, which is basically, these are similar to encryption, where you encrypt the space. So you can still provide the same level of location-based services without revealing the location of people who benefit from these services. In particular, the example you mentioned about the citizen journalism and uploading pictures and so on, that was an issue a couple of years ago in Iran during the Green Movement, because a couple of people actually got executed because of uploading pictures to CNN websites. So we look at that problem, and one of the solutions we came up with is that each picture, each image is fragmented to the small partitions and then sent to your social network. And after 8 hops of these fragments going to the server, there's no way to figure out who was the originator of the picture. So things like that are being studied.
So other big questions that we skirted or haven't thought through. Okay, I'm responsible. We have to come up with 2 big ideas in 5 minutes to put on the agenda for the panel discussion this afternoon, because we're going to play a game around them. Anyone wanted to think? Yes. Andrew.
I hardly think this is a big idea, but I'm Andrew Clement from the University of Toronto. I was interested in a number of these projects and the way in which they reappropriate personal commodity devices, I mean, namely, phones and tablets and so on, for more public sort of network connections. And I just wonder if you have looked at that more systematically in terms of your research on public media.
No, but I think that would be a theme that you're also seeing through the things. That's an interesting question about kind of continuing to get back to the relationship of the private and what is private in public space. How is public space now turning into a kind of stage for making the private public, right? Yeah.
I wonder if you've had any dialogue with planners or with architects in terms of your research. And I know that the American Planning Association is meeting here sometime this month. And do you have any contact with them by any chance?
Not that organization. I personally have collaborated with people from our School of Architecture here, and they're obviously interesting schools of thought in there. Some of our work was informed by really kind of cutting-edge architectural theory that is, in some respects, incredibly bloodless and peopleless. It's very algorithmic.
Yes, that's the issue.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's the whole issue.
Right. So, right.
Yeah, I mean, they don't know anything
yeah.
about feedback mechanisms, nor do
Right.
they care about them.
And the question of experience is not a question that is often kind of problematized, I think.
Okay.
But I think your point about bringing architects or urban planners, definitely, and certainly community activists who also work on these issues, policy and kind of policy influencers into these discussions are really interesting.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan. One more quick question. One more quick comment.
Quick
John.
question. I'm following up on your comment. It'd be very interesting to think about how would Jane Jacobs react to what she saw here today? Could you put her hat on and think about in what sense has the city's texture been amplified or detracted from her fundamental theories of what makes the city so creative?
If I can just add, the underlying question is the technologically and digitally mediated world as against the experience we have of one another in public places, now always going through screens and cell phones and so on. How does that change the Jane Jacobs view of what a neighborhood or what a public, or in the 19th century sense of Walter Benjamin's arcades, where we encounter one another directly, and now we seem to do it through screens and media and technology. What does that do to the character of urban relations and the public?
Good question. Last chance. Anyone? Ben? Yes. John? I get two. Yes. Okay. Would you take the mic, John? Thank you.
I may be replicating because I had to leave for a moment, but I think that the biggest issue that a lot of people are going to be facing going on is simply technology and jobs. What are people going to be doing?
I wanted to build a little on both the privacy and the Jane Jacobs discussion and put out the word negotiation as one that I think has come up as an interesting one here, because I think that from Jane Jacobs' notion of eyes on the street, there's a lot of ways in which surveillance is not just something that's either on or off, or we're safe or we're not, but it's actually a back and forth process. And I think that there are a lot of these different projects that were shown have some element of that negotiation rather than kind of the binaries of information being there or not being there. And I think that that lens has been helpful for me as I've been hearing some of the things people have been talking about.
Okay, wrap it up. Okay, thank you, everyone. We have, I think, the other half of the room joining us, so thank you.